Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Now this is probably the last video, which is video 4 on the A2 level biology chapter on biodiversity, and we've done 3 videos and this is the 4th one, which we could not complete 18.3 in the previous video. So we will continue it on this one. Now under the heading of protecting endangered species, the first one was national parks, which we've discussed in a previous video. And now we're going to talk about zoos. Now, zoos have a variety of functions in addition to providing enjoyment and interest for visitors who can see and study animals that they would not otherwise be able to see. Now, zoos provide protection for endangered and vulnerable species and have success with captive breeding programs, often with a long-term aim of reintroducing the animals to their natural habitat. So captive breeding means that we will breed these in the zoo. So we maybe have a couple of males and a couple of females, and then we breed them. And then when the cubs are born, we will reintroduce them into the wild. So hopefully the numbers which have gone so low, we will be able to maintain those numbers, and then they will probably be saved from extinction. So captive breeding and then the release of the young back into the wild. Now this of course can be done very effectively in zoos, because in zoos we can have a lot of care. We can look after the animals, we can feed them, we can have a vet looking after the pregnancy and seeing that everything goes okay, so that the babies are born, and then we can look after them for some while and then reintroduce them into the wild. Now a problem with breeding animals from small populations is inbreeding. Because we don't have such a lot of genetic diversity. So if you just have 2 males and 3 females, it's going to result in inbreeding. Now, the cheetah is a species classified by the IUCN as vulnerable. Now, genetic diversity among cheetahs is very low because they nearly became extinct 10,000 years ago and only a few survived. So, maintaining the genetic diversity is an aim in the conservation of many species, including the cheetah. In the wild, female cheetahs tend to mate with many different males, which helps to increase genetic diversity in the population. However, not every conservation attempt has been a success story. Some animals simply refuse to breed in captivity. Often it is not possible to create suitable habitats for them, so they cannot be returned to the wild. Sometimes even if a habitat exists, it is very difficult for the animal to adapt to living in it after being cared for in the zoo. The giant panda is a good example. In 2011, there were only 300 pandas in zoos and research centers in their native China, and others on loans to zoos around the world. A captive breeding program was started in 1963, and since then about 300 pandas have been born in captivity. But so far, no panda has successfully been returned to the wild. And the first captive bred panda to be released was killed, aged 5 years, probably by other pandas. So it's not a very success story, because we do captively breed them in captive breeding, but when we introduce the young back into the wild, they probably cannot survive because they don't know the ways of the wild. They don't know how to hunt, they don't know how to mate, they don't know how to go about, because they've been brought up in a zoo where they've just been given food. So they are unable to survive in the wild and may die of disease as well, because they've been looked after by vets. It's a very clean environment, and if they're sick, they're given an antibiotic injection. Now these animals will not be able to survive in the wild. So captive breeding programs, some are successful, some are not very successful at all. Now the next topic in how to keep endangered species, which make them less probability of becoming extinct. We use assisted reproduction as a solution to the problems of inbreeding. So zoos used to transport large mammals between them as part of their captive breeding programs. Movement of large animals is difficult and expensive, and breeding did not always happen. Now a cheaper option is to collect semen and keep it frozen in a sperm bank. Samples are collected from males, checked for sperm activity, and then diluted with a medium containing a buffer solution and albumin, and small volumes of semen are put into thin tubes known as straws, which are stored in liquid nitrogen at -196 degrees Celsius. Then different methods of assisted reproduction solve the problems of male and female who do not show any courtship behavior and will not mate. In artificial insemination, a semen straw is placed into warm water so the sperm becomes active and then put into a catheter which is inserted into the vagina through the cervix and into the uterus. And this may happen when the female is naturally on heat, but also may follow hormone treatment, so she ovulates at the time of the artificial insemination. This is called AI, artificial insemination. The hormone treatment can stimulate the female to superovulate to produce a large number of follicles, and following AI, the resulting embryo may be flushed out of the uterus and transferred to other females that have had normal treatment, hormonal treatment to prepare them for pregnancy. And these females need not be of the same species, they could be a related but not endangered species, and this process is called embryo transfer. So the embryos are transferred to other females where their uterus will be used, and those embryos can grow there. And the females that receive these embryos are called surrogate mothers. And this technique for embryo transfer has been used for many species, including wild dogs and different species of African antelope. Then the next one is in vitro fertilization. Now, oocytes are collected by inserting a needle into the ovaries and withdrawing some mature follicles. The oocytes are kept in a culture medium and then mixed with semen. So the sperms and the ovum are actually mixed in a petri dish in a lab. It's called in vitro fertilization. In vitro means in glass. Now the resulting zygote divides to form embryos which are cultured for several days and then placed into the mother or into several females of the same or different species. Then eggs and embryos can also be stored in much the same way as sperms. Eggs are more difficult to freeze, but they are more likely to be damaged by the freezing or thawing process. Eggs are fertilized in vitro and then frozen until such time as a surrogate mother becomes available. And then of course we come to the last topic, which is the frozen zoo, such as the one at the San Diego Zoo, holds genetic resources in the form of sperm, eggs and embryos from many endangered and vulnerable species until they might be needed. And frozen zoos can hold much more genetic diversity than a normal zoo, and the material can be kept for very long periods of time. Then we come to the problems of successful conservation. Sometimes conservation practices have been too successful, and the organism saved from extinction has increased in numbers beyond the capacity of the ecosystem to sustain such numbers. Now that's not very good. Now culling is actually killing them by some sort of a less harmful method to reduce the numbers, although it is a practice that arouses much emotion, especially when it is used to control the number of elephants. Between 1966 and 1994, more than 16,000 elephants were culled in the Kruger National Park, South Africa, to limit the growth of the population. Now, another alternative is to use some method of birth control. San Diego Zoo experimented with sedating males with wild mammals and cutting their sperm ducts, so vasectomy. Then chemical contraceptives are available, but they are different to the contraceptives that women may use, and they are not steroid hormones. Instead, a vaccine is used which targets the region surrounding the layer of glycoproteins around the egg, the zona pellucida. And when the vaccine is injected into a female animal, it stimulates an immune response that produces antibodies against these glycoproteins. So it blocks the sperm from fertilizing the egg, and this method has a 90% success rate in mammals. The next topic we come to is botanic gardens and seed banks. Now, botanic gardens play a similar role to zoos for endangered plants. Seeds or cuttings are collected from species in the wild and then used to build up a population of plants from which one day some plants may be reintroduced into their natural habitats. Now we also do a sort of tissue culture, and it is also possible to take small samples of cells and grow them on agar in sterile conditions. So we have this plant which is going to become extinct, and we have nutrient agar in this test tube, and we take a piece of this plant and we put it in here. So we take just a small sample of cells and grow them on the agar in sterile conditions. Now this cell divides by mitosis to give a mass of cells, and this mass of cells is called a callus. And then we give it a rooting hormone and develops roots. And then we give it a shooting hormone and develop shoots. So they will grow stem and roots. And now of course this was the one which was becoming extinct. So now we can produce millions of copies of this plant. But of course it all be genetically the same. And then we can replant these in the countries where they were becoming extinct. So it is easy to, this is called tissue culture, in which we can grow these plants and we can have as many copies of them as we want, of these one or two which are extinct. And we have just one or two of these or a few of these in the botanic gardens. So botanic gardens protect the endangered plant species. Then we do research methods of reproduction and growth so that special species cultivated in botanic gardens can be grown in appropriate conditions and be propagated. Then research conservation methods so plants can be introduced to new habitats if their original habitat has been destroyed by earthquake. Then reintroduce species to habitat where they have become very rare or extinct. And of course, the last is educate the public in the many roles of plants in ecosystems and their economic value. Next, we come on to seed banks. Now, the Royal Botanic Gardens in Kew, United Kingdom, has a huge ambitious project called the Millennium Seed Bank, which began in 2000. And the bank's ambition is to collect and store seeds from at least 25% of the world's plants by 2025, so that even if the plants become extinct in the wild, there will still be seeds from which they can grow. So this would be a seed bank. The Svalbard Global Seed Vault is a seed bank run by the government of Norway, and the vault is at the end of a 120-meter tunnel cut into the rock of a mountain on the island of Spitsbergen within the Arctic Circle. And the vault is thought to have ideal storage conditions, and it is only opened in the winter when the environmental temperature falls close to the operating temperature of minus 18 degrees Celsius. Its first seed samples went into storage in January 2008, and by 2013, the vault held over 770,000 different seed samples of crop varieties from all over the world. Most seeds are easy to store, but some plants have seeds that cannot be dried and frozen, and these recalcitrant seeds, as they are called, include seeds of economically important tropical species such as rubber, coconut, palm, coffee, and cocoa. And the only way to keep the genetic diversity of these species are to collect seeds and grow successive generations of plants, or to keep them as tissue culture. Coconut palms are particularly difficult to put in a seed bank. The seed coconut is very large. The embryo is too large to freeze successfully. So the collectors remove the embryos from the seeds, culture them in sterile tubes, and eventually plant them. So this was all the information that I want you to know about the seed bank. Now the next heading is controlling alien species. Alien or invasive species are those that have moved from one ecosystem to another where they were previously unknown. Now, people have been responsible for the movement of species about the globe by trading animals and plants or unwittingly carrying them on ships. Some have been introduced as a biological control agent. Perhaps the most notorious introduction is the cane toad. Introduced to Queensland, Australia from Hawaii in 1935 to control an insect pest of sugarcane. Now they were brought in, these toads, thinking that they would eat the insect pests which used to destroy the sugarcane crop. Now in Australia, surprisingly, the cane toad has become a pest. And if you put on YouTube Australia cane toad, you can see lots and lots of videos on that, very interesting videos. And the cane toad has become a pest and has spread across the eastern, northern and western parts of the country. The cane toad, the reason why the cane toad is breeding so fast, is now increased in millions and millions of them are now found, because there is no natural predator in Australia which is going to eat it. Because it produces a powerful toxin that kills most animals that eat it. So many animals are now becoming extinct because of the fact that when they try to eat these frogs, these toads, well, they die. And the cane toads also compete with some other amphibian species for food and are known to eat the chicks of ground nesting birds. Now, other alien species are escapees or animals introduced from sport. It is thought that the rabbit introduced to Australia in the 19th century has been responsible for more loss of biodiversity than any other factor. Then Burmese pythons have invaded the Everglades National Park in Florida because pet owners found that they could not look after them anymore and just let them go into the wild. Now the pythons feed on a variety of mammals and birds, so competing with native predators. Now this makes it difficult to conserve endangered species in the national park. Humans are the python's only predator. Although efforts to remove the pythons completely from Florida have failed, and it looks as if trying to stop the population increasing too much is the only option available. So basically introducing alien species can be, or they just come like that, or we might introduce them ourselves, but they can produce a lot of problems for the native species, or they can upset the biodiversity in that area. You see, invasive species have a variety of effects. The successful predators with few controls, and they may compete effectively with native organisms which occupy the same niche and push them to extinction. So it is a very important topic that you all must know about how to control alien species and how we should not be introducing them. Now the next topic is international conservation organizations. Now these of course are only two that we need to talk about. Number one is CITES and the other two is WWF, Worldwide Fund for Nature. Okay, now what is CITES stands for? CITES is a convention on international trade in endangered species. Convention on international trade in endangered species of wild flora and fauna, and of course CITES is this for short. Now CITES considers the evidence presented to it about endangered and vulnerable species and assigns them to one of the three appendices, which means that either extinct, they should not be harmed, or whatever, they go to their three appendices. We're just going to talk about those in a while. Now the species listed in the CITES appendices are reviewed by expert committee, and the list is growing. If trade in a species or its products become illegal, then the price that can be obtained from those products rises, and this is likely to make it worthwhile for people to break the law. So CITES, Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Flora and Fauna. Then the next topic is WWF, which is the Worldwide Fund for Nature, is one of the best known campaigning groups for wildlife. And this was established in 1961. And WWF is the largest international non-governmental organization specializing in conservation. And main thing is to stop the degradation of the planet's natural environment, and to build a future in which humans live in harmony with nature. It funds conservation projects, publicizes environmental issues, and campaigns to save ecosystems from degradation and species from extinction. The last topic is restoring degraded habitats. Now, conservation involves restoring areas that have been degraded by human activity or by natural catastrophes. such as flood, fire, hurricane, typhoon, and earthquake. Now we can do this on a small scale when a farmer plants the trees, so then the biodiversity is sort of reignited. Then mangrove forests are found throughout the tropics, and this is an extremely rich ecosystem that provides valuable protection to coastlines from storms. So many mangrove forests have been cut down to make way for coastal developments. One place where replanting mangroves is important is in the Sundarbans Delta region, which covers some 26,000 square kilometers in India and Bangladesh and now has the largest mangrove forest in the world. And this area with a high diversity is at risk of rising sea levels, and planting mangroves is thought likely to offer some protection against the effect of this. Might reduce coastal erosion and act as a barrier to rising sea levels. And then of course we come to the good story of Haiti, and Haiti was destroyed by earthquake, and after centuries of deforestation, soil erosion, and then severe land degradation in Haiti, efforts are now being made to restore some of the forests that used to cover the country. And numerous NGOs are working with community groups in tree planting project in what is in effect a rescue mission. And Haiti is a lesson to the world as to the effects of neglecting the welfare of trees. So, restoring degraded habitats. Now, here is the diagram or the table for the table 18.6 from the book, from the A-level biology book, is the CITES appendices 1, 2 and 3. Now, appendices 1 means criteria. Appendix 1 means what is the criteria. So, number 1, species that are most endangered and threatened with extinction. So, all trade in this species is banned. And these are the orangutans and whatever, Polonia, Indonesia, and the pitcher plants. So, animal examples and plant examples. Then the second one is the criteria: species that are not threatened with extinction but will be unless trade is closely controlled. And trade is only allowed if an export permit is granted by the countries concerned. And of course, the examples are that of Sir David's long-beaked Echidna and zooglosses, and all species of the genus Nepenthes and the Venus flytrap as well. Then number 3 is species included at the request of a country that regulates trade in the species and needs the cooperation of other countries to prevent unsustainable or illegal exploitation. And trade in this species regulated, permits are required, but they are easier to obtain than for species in Appendix 2. And these are the example of the pink pigeon and the spur tree from Nepal. So these are the 3 criteria. Number 1, most threatened endangered extinction. Now all trade will be banned. Then not threatened with extinction unless trade is closely controlled. So trade is only allowed if an export permit is granted. And the third is that, okay, well, they are not becoming extinct, but we need to prevent certain illegal exploitation of that, because maybe certain countries, they sell for more money in that country, so then they're sold to those countries, like hawks, and they're sold to the United Arab Emirates for a lot of money because they like to keep hawks, and they probably go for hunting and use those hawks. So this is all that we have to know about biodiversity. That finishes the chapter on biodiversity, and I'm uploading these last 2 videos to complete the A2 syllabus, and this should of course be enough for you to revise the entire A2 syllabus from these videos. And thank you so much for being a subscriber and going through the videos, and I hope they've been helpful to you, and I wish you the best of luck in the exams. Thank you once again.